June 7, 1942. Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. The wounds of December 7th still raw. The American naval base buzzes with frantic activity as intelligence officers pore over captured Japanese codebooks. Lieutenant Commander Douglas Fairweather, 34, squints at intercepted radio transmissions through wire-rimmed glasses in a windowless room deep within the Naval Intelligence Building. Outside, tropical sunshine bathes the Pacific in gold, but Fairweather hasn't seen daylight in 36 hours. His desk is buried under stacks of intelligence reports, coffee rings staining classified documents that track Japanese fleet movements across the Pacific. The United States Navy faces a devastating reality. After Pearl Harbor, the Japanese Imperial Navy outguns the Americans in nearly every category: carriers, battleships, cruisers, destroyers, submarines. Intelligence estimates suggest the Japanese hold a 3-to-1 advantage in functional aircraft carriers. Admiral Chester Nimitz, commander of the Pacific Fleet, needs a miracle to prevent Japan from solidifying its expanding empire across the Pacific. Fairweather sets down a decoded message with hands that tremble from caffeine and exhaustion. He stares at a large map of the Pacific Theater pinned to the wall, tiny model ships representing the known positions of American and Japanese vessels. The imbalance is starkly visible. Beside him, Lieutenant Sarah Holloway, 27, a former linguistics professor at Stanford, translates another intercepted message. "They're discussing fleet deployments near the Philippines," she says, her voice tight with concentration. "They expect minimal American naval presence." Fairweather nods slowly, his eyes never leaving the map. "That's because they know exactly where our ships are. They've penetrated our communications." In his mind, an idea forms, dangerous, possibly career-ending, but potentially game-changing. What if the Japanese only thought they knew where American ships were? What if the United States could fight with phantom fleets that existed only in Japanese intelligence reports? In that moment, an extraordinary deception campaign is born, one that would eventually convince the Japanese Imperial Command that they faced not merely the 6 fleet carriers America actually possessed, but 16 phantom carriers that existed only in carefully crafted radio transmissions and falsified communications. The strategy would rewrite the rules of naval intelligence and save countless American lives by forcing Japan to divide its forces against enemies that were nothing more than ghosts. The morning briefing begins at 0700 in a secure conference room at Pearl Harbor's Intelligence Center. Captain James Rochefort, head of Station Hypo, the Navy's Pacific Signals Intelligence Unit, presides over a table of bleary-eyed intelligence officers. Maps and intelligence summaries cover the conference table's polished surface. "Gentlemen, our situation remains critical," Rochefort begins, his voice gravelly from chain-smoking camels. "Japanese naval intelligence continues to maintain superiority in tracking our fleet movements." Lieutenant Commander Fairweather shifts uncomfortably in his chair. He's requested 5 minutes at the end of the briefing for a proposal, so outlandish he hasn't dared discuss it with anyone but Lieutenant Holloway. His service record shows him to be methodical, analytical, cautious, not a man given to wild schemes or flights of fancy. A meteorologist by training, he approaches problems with scientific precision. This makes what he's about to propose all the more unexpected. The son of a Minnesota mathematics professor, Fairweather had joined the Navy in 1934 after completing his doctorate in meteorology at the University of Chicago. His dissertation on predictive atmospheric modeling had caught the attention of naval recruiters looking for scientific minds to modernize weather forecasting for fleet operations. But Fairweather's analytical skills had quickly led him from meteorology to intelligence work, where pattern recognition proved as valuable in tracking enemy movements as in predicting storm formations. As the briefing concludes, Rochefort nods to Fairweather. "You had something, Commander?" The room falls silent as Fairweather stands, straightens his uniform, and takes a deep breath. "Sir, I propose we create non-existent naval task forces through controlled radio deception." The silence deepens. Someone coughs. Rochefort's eyes narrow. "Go on." Fairweather outlines his radical proposition. The Japanese rely heavily on radio direction finding and traffic analysis to track our fleet movements. What if we create phantom fleets through carefully orchestrated radio transmissions that mimic the communications patterns of actual naval task forces? He pulls a folder from his briefcase and distributes documents showing Japanese radio intercept patterns. We can establish fake fleet designations, assign them commanders, and create complete organizational structures, all through radio transmissions alone. Commander Ellis Thompson, 41, a career intelligence officer with a reputation for by-the-book operations, scoffs audibly. "You're suggesting we try to fool Japanese intelligence with make-believe ships?" His voice drips with scorn. "This isn't a children's game of pretend, Lieutenant Commander." Thompson had spent 20 years rising through naval intelligence ranks, his career built on methodical analysis and cautious recommendations. A graduate of Annapolis with distinction, he had served aboard the USS Arizona before transferring to intelligence work in 1937. The attack on Pearl Harbor had been deeply personal for Thompson. He had lost 37 former shipmates when the Arizona went down. His skepticism toward unconventional approaches stems partly from grief hardened into rigid professionalism. Fairweather stands his ground. "Sir, with respect, this is exactly the kind of unconventional thinking we need. The Japanese expect us to operate within conventional parameters. They've structured their intelligence gathering accordingly. We have an opportunity to exploit that expectation." He points to the Pacific map. "Every phantom fleet we create forces them to divert real resources to counter imaginary threats." Captain Rochefort, known for his unorthodox approaches and brilliant code-breaking work, taps his cigarette thoughtfully against an ashtray. He's silent for 30 seconds, a silence that feels like hours to Fairweather. Then, how would we maintain the deception? The Japanese will expect visual confirmation eventually. Joseph Rochefort had earned a reputation for brilliance tempered with pragmatism. His work leading Station Hypo had already proven critical in the Battle of Midway, where his code-breaking team had given American forces advanced knowledge of Japanese plans. Unorthodox himself, he famously worked in a bathrobe and slippers during long code-breaking sessions. Rochefort nevertheless demanded rigorous analysis and concrete results. Fairweather nods, having anticipated the question. "We create layered deception, sir. The radio transmissions establish the existence of the fleets. Then we plant false information through channels we know are compromised. We create false supply requisitions, personnel transfers, even falsified war diaries and action reports that refer to these non-existent units. We establish shore facilities to support fleets that don't exist." Rochefort's eyes glint with interest now. "And how many phantom fleets do you propose we create, Commander?" 10, sir. 10 complete task forces, each centered around a carrier group." The room erupts in murmurs and objections. The United States Navy had lost carriers at Pearl Harbor and in subsequent engagements. Creating the illusion of 10 additional carrier groups seems beyond ambitious. It seems delusional. Commander Thompson slams his hand on the table. "This is absurd. Even if it worked initially, the Japanese would discover the deception as soon as these phantom fleets fail to appear in expected engagements." Lieutenant Holloway, who has been silent until now, speaks up. "Actually, sir, that's part of the beauty of the plan. When phantom fleets fail to materialize, it reinforces Japanese beliefs about their own intelligence failures, not our deception. They'll assume their intelligence was faulty or that the fleet changed course. It creates a feedback loop of uncertainty. Sarah Holloway had joined naval intelligence through an unusual path. A linguistics prodigy who spoke 7 languages fluently by age 20, she had been recruited directly from Stanford University, where she had been the youngest professor in the linguistics department. Her expertise in Japanese language patterns and communication structures made her invaluable to Pacific Fleet intelligence operations. Though frequently underestimated due to both her age and gender, Holloway had earned respect through analytical precision and an uncanny ability to predict Japanese communication behaviors. Rochefort studies the proposal documents for several long minutes. The room remains tense, opinions clearly divided. Finally, he looks up at Fairweather. "Implement a pilot program. 1 phantom fleet. Give it a designation, create its communication pattern, establish its organizational structure. We'll evaluate results after 30 days. And so begins Operation Ghost Fleet, one of the most audacious deception campaigns of World War II, a campaign that would eventually convince the Japanese Imperial Command that they faced not merely the 6 fleet carriers America actually possessed, but 16 phantom carriers, spread across 10 non-existent task forces. Lieutenant Commander Fairweather's modest office becomes the birthplace of Task Force 81, a completely fictional naval group centered around the USS Constitution, a non-existent aircraft carrier supposedly carrying 96 aircraft. Fairweather and Holloway work through the night, establishing the task force's complete organizational structure, support ships, commanding officers, even distinctive communication patterns for each vessel. The key, Fairweather explains to his small team, now expanded to include 2 communications specialists and a cryptography expert, is to establish consistent, believable communication patterns. He points to a chart showing typical message traffic for an actual carrier group. Every ship has its own communication fingerprint, frequency of transmissions, length of messages, encryption protocols. They all form patterns Japanese radio intelligence has learned to recognize. Lieutenant Marcus Chen, 26, a brilliant communications specialist recruited from MIT, nods in understanding. So we create unique communication fingerprints for each of our ghost ships. He's already developing algorithms to generate message patterns that mimic real naval communications without becoming too predictable. Chen had been a radio engineering prodigy before the war, developing advanced frequency modulation techniques that had caught the Navy's attention. Born to Chinese immigrants who operated a laundry business in San Francisco, Chen had faced discrimination throughout his academic career, yet had graduated at the top of his class at MIT. His understanding of radio propagation patterns and signal analysis made him ideal for creating believable transmission profiles for non-existent vessels. Exactly, Fairweather confirms, and we need to account for everything: position reports, weather observations, maintenance requests, personnel transfers. Our Phantom fleet needs to breathe. The team establishes a shore facility at Pearl Harbor, dedicated to generating radio traffic for Task Force 81. Radio operators transmit according to carefully crafted schedules, creating the illusion of a complete carrier group conducting operations near the Solomon Islands, an area where Japanese intelligence expects increased American naval activity. The radio operation room grows into a theatrical production of sorts. Operators assume the personas of communications officers aboard Phantom ships, developing distinctive transmission styles and even communication quirks. Ensign Robert Williams, 22, a former drama student from Northwestern University before enlisting, brings particular enthusiasm to his role as communications officer for the fictional USS Constitution. Each ship needs its own character, Williams explains to the team. The Constitution's radio operator is precise, formal, follows protocols exactly. The destroyer Vigilance has a communications officer who uses slightly more abbreviated language, occasionally drops articles. These subtle distinctions add layers of authenticity to the Phantom fleet's communications. The deception includes deliberate security lapses, messages sent with outdated encryption that Japanese cryptanalysts can break, revealing tantalizing details about the non-existent task force. We need to let them discover Task Force 81, Fairweather explains. Information they steal is always more credible than information we give them. Senior Chief Petty Officer Daniel Morales, 48, a 30-year veteran of naval communications with an encyclopedic knowledge of encryption protocols, proves invaluable in this aspect of the operation. It's about creating vulnerability that looks accidental, he explains to the team. The encryption needs to be good enough that the Japanese work to break it, but with carefully engineered weaknesses, they can exploit with effort. Morales crafts encryption schemes that appear secure, but contain subtle flaws Japanese cryptanalysts can penetrate with sufficient determination. 3 weeks into the operation, the first signs of success appear. Japanese naval communications, decoded by Station Hypo's cryptanalysts, include multiple references to an American carrier group operating near the Solomons, exactly where Fairweather's Phantom Task Force 81 supposedly patrols. More significantly, Japanese communications reveal the redeployment of air reconnaissance assets to search for the non-existent carrier group. Captain Rochefort calls Fairweather to his office after reviewing the latest intelligence. The normally reserved intelligence chief actually smiles as Fairweather enters. They've taken the bait, Commander. Japanese search planes are burning fuel looking for ships that don't exist. He slides a decoded message across his desk. They've even diverted a destroyer group to intercept. The decoded transcript reveals Japanese frustration. Target fleet not located at reported coordinates, one message reads. Continuing search pattern Bravo, request additional air assets. Another communication indicates the Japanese commander believes the American fleet is using advanced evasion tactics, when in reality, there is simply nothing to find. Fairweather feels a surge of vindication mixed with the sobering realization of what comes next. Sir, with your permission, I'd like to expand the operation, create additional Phantom fleets. Rochefort nods. Proceed, Commander. Admiral Nimitz has taken personal interest in your operation. You'll brief him tomorrow at 0900. The evening before his meeting with Admiral Nimitz, Fairweather walks along the shores of Pearl Harbor, watching the sunset paint the water in shades of orange and gold. The massive silhouettes of actual American warships dot the harbor, powerful, but far too few to counter the Japanese naval advantage across the vast Pacific. He considers how strange it is that his greatest contribution to the war effort might be ships that exist only in the enemy's imagination. The briefing with Admiral Chester Nimitz marks a turning point for Operation Ghost Fleet. The Admiral, known for his strategic brilliance and calm leadership, listens intently as Fairweather outlines the success of Task Force 81 and his proposals for expansion. When Fairweather finishes, Nimitz is silent for a full minute, studying the intelligence reports. Chester Nimitz had assumed command of the Pacific Fleet in the darkest days after Pearl Harbor, inheriting a devastated force and the enormous responsibility of halting Japanese expansion across the Pacific. Known for his methodical approach and strategic vision, Nimitz had already demonstrated an openness to unconventional tactics when they showed promise. His calm demeanor masks an intensely analytical mind that quickly grasps the strategic implications of Fairweather's deception plan. "You realize what you're proposing, Commander," he finally says, his voice measured. "A deception on an unprecedented scale, creating not just Phantom ships, but entire operational doctrines, command structures, supply lines. It's not a question, but a statement, an acknowledgement of the audacity of Fairweather's vision." "Yes, sir. But the evidence suggests it's working. The Japanese are already diverting resources to counter a fleet that doesn't exist." Nimitz nods slowly. "The greatest advantage we have, Commander, isn't ships or planes or even men. It's uncertainty. If we can make the Japanese uncertain about where to commit their forces, we multiply the effectiveness of every actual ship we possess." He makes his decision. "You have authorization to expand to 5 Phantom task forces. I want weekly reports on Japanese responses." As Fairweather leaves the Admiral's office, he feels the weight of the responsibility he now carries. His deception isn't just a clever trick. It's become a strategic pillar of the Pacific war effort. Lives will depend on how convincingly he can populate the Pacific with ghost ships. Over the next 4 months, Fairweather's operation grows exponentially. What began as a desperate gamble transforms into a sophisticated intelligence operation employing dozens of specialists. Task Forces 81 through 85 emerge from radio transmissions, each with distinctive communication patterns, command structures, and operational areas. The deception expands beyond radio transmissions. False supply requisitions circulate through channels known to be compromised. Personnel transfer orders mention assignments to non-existent ships. Engineers request specialized parts for Phantom vessels. Even the classified Navy directory is carefully seeded with fictional commanding officers for the ghost fleets. Commander William Harrison, 45, a logistics specialist with extensive experience in fleet supply operations, joins the team to ensure the Phantom fleets generate believable support requirements. "Real fleets consume resources at predictable rates," Harrison explains during a planning session. Fuel, food, ammunition, spare parts, these consumption patterns create signatures that Japanese intelligence tracks. Harrison develops intricate supply request patterns for each Phantom fleet, ensuring they align with the fictional operations being conducted. When Task Force 83 conducts intensive air operations against supposed Japanese positions, the corresponding increase in ammunition and aviation fuel requisitions adds credibility to the deception. Lieutenant Holloway develops an ingenious system for tracking the complex web of fiction they're creating. "We need absolute consistency," she explains to the expanded team. Every fictional captain needs a consistent biography. Every phantom ship needs a consistent maintenance history. One contradiction could unravel the entire operation. The tracking system fills an entire room with cross-referenced card catalogues. Staff members joke that it's a library of ships that don't exist. Each Phantom vessel has a complete dossier: commissioning date, technical specifications, maintenance history, crew complement, even notable incidents and battle damage. When communications reference a boiler problem on the fictional destroyer Resilience, that issue is meticulously documented and tracked through subsequent repair communications. The psychological dimension proves just as important as the technical aspects. Japanese naval intelligence isn't a machine. It's composed of people with expectations and biases, Fairweather explains during a strategy session. They expect American carriers to operate in certain ways. We need to play to those expectations while introducing just enough variability to seem authentic. Dr. Eleanor Richards, 36, a cultural anthropologist who had studied in Japan before the war, joins the team as a psychological warfare consultant. Her understanding of Japanese military culture proves invaluable in crafting deceptions that exploit specific cultural assumptions and organizational behaviors. The Imperial Japanese Navy has a hierarchical culture that discourages questioning superior officers, Richards explains. If we can convince senior Japanese commanders that our phantom fleets exist, junior officers will be reluctant to challenge that belief, even when evidence is contradictory. They'll work to rationalize conflicting data rather than question the fundamental assumption. The team creates distinctive operational patterns for each Phantom task force. Task Force 82 aggressively patrols near the Marshall Islands, while Task Force 84 conducts more conservative operations near the Aleutians. Each Phantom fleet develops its own personality through carefully crafted communications and leaked operational details. By November 1942, Japanese naval communications reveal the astounding success of the deception. Imperial Japanese Navy headquarters now believes the American Pacific Fleet includes at least 11 carrier groups, nearly double its actual strength. More importantly, Japanese defensive deployments reflect this belief, with forces spread thin to counter threats that exist only in radio transmissions. In a secure conference room at Pearl Harbor, Admiral Nimitz reviews the latest intelligence with Fairweather and his team. "Gentlemen, and Lieutenant Holloway, you've accomplished something remarkable," Nimitz says, his normally stern expression softened by satisfaction. Japanese Naval Command now believes we have carriers operating in 5 different sectors simultaneously. They're stretching their forces to respond. He points to a map showing Japanese fleet deployments. This creates opportunities for our actual fleet elements. The implications become clear in the subsequent months. As Japanese forces disperse to counter Phantom threats, actual American naval units achieve tactical superiority in critical engagements despite overall numerical disadvantage. At the Battle of the Philippine Sea in June 1944, Japanese commanders hold back significant forces to counter a Phantom carrier group supposedly approaching from the northeast, a group that exists only in radio transmissions generated by Fairweather's team. Vice Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa, commanding the Japanese mobile fleet during the battle, later expresses frustration in his personal journals about conflicting intelligence that forced him to divide his forces. American carrier strength reports were contradictory, he writes. We had to maintain reserve elements to counter reported Task Force 84 approaching from northeastern sector. This division of forces contributes significantly to the one-sided American victory that becomes known as the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. The deception campaign continues to evolve as the war progresses. When American shipyards begin producing Essex-class carriers at an accelerated rate in 1943, Fairweather's team incorporates these real additions into their deception matrix, creating confusion about which carriers are real and which are phantoms. By 1944, Japanese intelligence believes the Americans have 32 operational aircraft carriers, more than double the actual number. The operation develops increasingly sophisticated techniques. When the Japanese successfully break an American encryption system in early 1944, Fairweather's team exploits this compromise by feeding carefully crafted disinformation through these secure channels, knowing the Japanese will consider such intercepted communications particularly reliable. Operation Ghost Fleet faces its greatest test during the planning for the invasion of Iwo Jima. By this point, Fairweather's operation has expanded to maintain 10 Phantom task forces, including 16 non-existent aircraft carriers. The elaborate deception has grown to involve hundreds of personnel generating thousands of radio transmissions, false intelligence reports, and supporting documentation. Japanese naval intelligence, now thoroughly confused about American naval strength and deployment patterns, estimates that the United States can bring at least 21 carriers to bear in the upcoming operation. The reality is far different. The actual operation will involve only 16 carriers, many of them smaller escort carriers with limited aircraft capacity. Captain Ellis Thompson, once the operation's most vocal critic, now leads the team creating deception plans specifically for the Iwo Jima campaign. "We need to convince Japanese command that we're planning a major diversionary attack," he explains during planning sessions. "Make them believe we're committing at least 5 carrier groups to a feint operation against positions 600 miles from the actual landing site." Thompson's conversion from skeptic to advocate had come gradually as he witnessed the operation's success. "I was wrong," he had admitted to Fairweather after the Battle of the Philippine Sea. "Your ghosts fight as effectively as real ships." His expertise in traditional naval intelligence now proves invaluable in creating deceptions that exploit Japanese analytical weaknesses. The Iwo Jima deception includes an elaborate feint suggesting American forces would bypass the island entirely and strike directly at mainland Japan. Phantom task forces 87 and 89 generate intensive communication patterns suggesting final preparations for a major operation against Yokosuka Naval Base. Japanese High Command, detecting these communications, diverts critical air assets to defend the homeland that might otherwise have reinforced Iwo Jima's defenses. The plan works with devastating effectiveness. As American forces approach Iwo Jima in February 1945, Japanese naval and air assets remain dispersed, with significant forces positioned to counter a phantom attack that never materializes. The deception contributes directly to reduced American casualties during the amphibious landings. Fleet Admiral Mitsumasa Yonai, Japan's Navy minister, later confesses to interrogators that Imperial Command had been fighting shadows throughout much of the war. "We never knew with certainty where American carrier forces were," he admits. "We were forced to disperse our forces to counter threats that seemed to materialize everywhere simultaneously." The full extent of Operation Ghost Fleet's success becomes apparent only after the war, when interrogations of captured Japanese naval intelligence officers reveal the depth of the deception's impact. Captain Hideaki Nakamura, who headed the Imperial Japanese Navy's Pacific Fleet Tracking Section, expresses disbelief when informed that many of the American carriers his unit had been tracking didn't exist. "Impossible," he initially insists through a translator. "We intercepted their communications. We tracked their movements. We had confirmation from multiple intelligence sources." When shown the detailed operation logs of Fairweather's deception team, Nakamura falls silent, then shakes his head in reluctant admiration. "We were fighting ghosts," he finally says. The psychological impact on Japanese commanders had been profound. Admiral Soemu Toyoda, who commanded the combined fleet in the war's final year, describes the atmosphere of uncertainty that plagued Japanese naval planning. "We could never concentrate our forces effectively," he tells interrogators. "American carrier groups seemed to appear and disappear like phantoms. We were fighting not just an enemy fleet, but an enemy we couldn't locate with certainty." For Lieutenant Commander Douglas Fairweather, the operation's success brings a mixture of professional vindication and personal reflection. During the final months of the war, as he prepares reports documenting the full scope of Operation Ghost Fleet, he considers the nature of modern warfare, how perception can become as powerful as reality, how information itself can be weaponized. "We didn't just deceive Japanese intelligence," he writes in his final classified report. "We created an alternative reality they were forced to inhabit, a reality populated by phantom ships that consumed real resources, altered genuine strategic calculations, and ultimately contributed to saving American lives. In the quiet hours after Japan's surrender, Fairweather sits alone in his office, surrounded by the elaborate fiction he and his team had constructed, thousands of communications logs from ships that never sailed, action reports from battles never fought, personnel records of sailors who never existed. The scale of the deception astounds even him. In the final analysis, his team had created and maintained the fictional activities of 237 non-existent vessels, including 16 aircraft carriers, a paper fleet larger than most nations' actual navies. Admiral Nimitz, reviewing the operation's complete history after the war, notes that Operation Ghost Fleet represents a fundamental evolution in naval warfare, the recognition that the battle space extends beyond physical geography into the cognitive domain, where beliefs and perceptions can be shaped as deliberately as territorial objectives. The legacy of Operation Ghost Fleet extends far beyond World War II, influencing military deception doctrine for generations. The operation demonstrates that in modern warfare, what an adversary believes can be as important as objective reality. Every major military power subsequently establishes units dedicated to strategic deception, many directly inspired by Fairweather's innovative approach. In the decades after the war, elements of Operation Ghost Fleet remain classified, its techniques considered too valuable to reveal completely. Lieutenant Commander Fairweather, promoted to captain and later rear admiral, continues to shape American military intelligence, emphasizing the cognitive dimension of warfare, how adversary decision-making can be influenced through carefully crafted deception operations. During the Cold War, similar techniques are employed to create phantom missile installations, non-existent military units, and fictional weapons systems, all designed to complicate Soviet strategic calculations and force the diversion of resources to counter threats that exist only in carefully manufactured intelligence reports. The Soviet Union, learning from declassified aspects of Operation Ghost Fleet, develops its own elaborate maskirovka, deception programs. The strategic chess game between East and West includes moves made with pieces that exist only in the opponent's mind, phantom divisions, fictional missile capabilities, non-existent submarine deployments. The cognitive battlespace that Fairweather had pioneered becomes as important as physical geography in the delicate balance of Cold War power. The fundamental insight of Operation Ghost Fleet, that adversaries can be deceived not just about intentions, but about basic facts like force composition and capabilities, becomes a cornerstone of military deception doctrine. The operation demonstrates that in warfare, perception management can be as decisive as physical combat. As military technology evolves into the digital age, the principles pioneered by Fairweather's team find new applications. Cyber warfare specialists create phantom network architectures, fictional data repositories, and illusory system vulnerabilities, all designed to divert adversary resources and attention from actual targets. The ghost chips of 1942 become ghost servers and phantom databases in the information battlespace of the 21st century. Lieutenant Sarah Holloway, whose linguistic expertise had been crucial to creating believable communication patterns for the Phantom fleets, rises to become one of the first female admirals in the United States Navy. Her post-war research into communication pattern analysis and deception detection influences generations of intelligence analysts. The most effective deceptions, she writes in a classified monograph in 1967, are those that exploit the target's existing beliefs and expectations. We succeeded because we told the Japanese what they already believed, that America must have more carriers than intelligence initially suggested. For the men and women who created and sustained the Phantom fleets, the operation represents something profound about modern conflict. As Lieutenant Holloway, who goes on to become one of the Navy's top intelligence officers, later observes, "We didn't just fight with ships and planes. We fought with information, with narratives, with carefully constructed illusions that became real in their consequences." Lieutenant Marcus Chen, the communications specialist who had developed the distinctive transmission patterns for the Phantom vessels, establishes the Navy's Electronic Warfare School after the war. His curriculum includes case studies from Operation Ghost Fleet, teaching new generations of signal specialists how perception can be manipulated through carefully crafted communications deception. The electromagnetic spectrum, he tells his students, is not just a medium for transmitting information, it's a battle space where reality itself is contested. The full story of how a desperate gamble by a meteorologist-turned-intelligence officer created a navy of ghosts that helped win the Pacific War remains partially classified even today, its techniques still considered relevant to modern information warfare. But its central lesson endures, that in warfare what an adversary believes can be weaponized as effectively as any aircraft carrier or battleship. At the Naval War College in Newport, Rhode Island, Operation Ghost Fleet becomes a case study in asymmetric advantage, how a weaker force can effectively counter a stronger one through cognitive manipulation rather than direct confrontation. Military strategists analyze how Fairweather's deception allowed America's limited naval assets to achieve local superiority despite overall numerical disadvantage, a principle with applications across all domains of warfare. Rear Admiral Douglas Fairweather retires from naval service in 1964 after a distinguished career spanning 3 decades. At his retirement ceremony, Fleet Admiral Chester Nimitz, himself long retired but present to honor his former intelligence officer, summarizes Fairweather's unique contribution. Some officers win wars with the ships they command. Admiral Fairweather won a war with ships that existed only in the enemy's imagination. In his private papers, declassified decades after his death, Fairweather reflects on the moral dimension of his greatest achievement. Deception in warfare raises complex ethical questions, he writes. Yet I believe our phantom fleets ultimately saved lives on both sides by preventing the concentration of forces that would have led to even more devastating engagements. The ships that never sailed prevented the sinking of many that did. And somewhere in the vastness of the Pacific, the phantom carriers of Task Forces 81 through 90 still patrol in the historical imagination, ships that never existed except in Japanese intelligence reports, yet helped shape the outcome of history's greatest naval conflict. Their influence lives on in military academies worldwide, where officers study how Lieutenant Commander Douglas Fairweather's insane idea made Japan believe the United States had 10 extra fleets, and in so doing, helped change the course of the Pacific War. The morning briefing room at the Pentagon still displays a quote attributed to Admiral Chester Nimitz regarding Operation Ghost Fleet. Never in the history of naval warfare have so many been defeated by so few, especially when many of the few didn't exist at all. It stands as a testament to how imagination, properly applied, can become a weapon more powerful than steel. In the archives at the Naval Historical Center in Washington, D.C., our researchers can find a small, easily overlooked artifact from Operation Ghost Fleet, a simple ship's bell engraved with USS Constitution CVA-81. The bell was cast and displayed at the shore facility that coordinated the Phantom carrier's non-existent operations, a tangible symbol for a vessel that fought and won battles without ever leaving port, without ever being built, without ever existing except as radio waves and careful notations in Japanese intelligence logs. The bell rings still in the historical memory of naval warfare, reminding us that in the fog of war, perception often matters more than reality, that battles can be won with ships that sail only in the minds of the enemy. In modern warfare classrooms across the globe, young officers learn that sometimes the most powerful weapon isn't the one you possess, but the one your enemy believes you possess. This remains the enduring legacy of Operation Ghost Fleet and the brilliant naval officer whose imagination helped turn the tide of the greatest naval conflict in human history. Decades later, military historians would rank Operation Ghost Fleet among the most successful deception operations ever conducted, alongside Operation Fortitude that protected the D-Day landings and the British double-cross system that turned German spies against their masters. In 1996, during a symposium on information warfare at the Naval Postgraduate School in Monterey, California, Admiral William Stanford, then Director of Naval Intelligence, acknowledges the operation's continued relevance. The fundamental principles pioneered by Fairweather's team remain at the core of our information warfare doctrine today, he tells the assembled officers. The battle space of perception is as critical now as it was then, perhaps even more so in an age of global information networks. When a naval cadet at the symposium asks if such deceptions would still work in the modern era of satellite imagery and electronic surveillance, Stanford smiles. "The technologies change," he replies, "but human psychology remains constant. The most sophisticated sensor systems are still interpreted by human analysts with expectations and biases." Fairweather didn't just understand radio transmissions. He understood the minds that would receive and interpret them. Perhaps the most fitting epitaph for Operation Ghost Fleet comes from a simple note found among Fairweather's personal papers after his death in 1982. Written on the back of a photograph showing the tactical operations room where his team had coordinated the movements of non-existent fleets, are just 7 words. Sometimes the best weapon is an empty holster.